From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights podcast.
Welcome to HPS Insights, a regular podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies, analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host, Bryan DeAngelis, Managing Director at HPS. Today we'll take a look into the results from the Democratic primary from the past two Tuesdays, with 14 states voting on Super Tuesday and 6 more last night. I'm joined by our partner, Stacy Kerr, and a former assistant to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, as well as Meghan Pennington, Senior Director here at HPS, former Communications Director for Senator Tom Carper. Today, we'll start with the results and pivot into how the general election is shaping up. So let me just throw out the first question. Is the Democratic primary over?
I think so. I mean, if you're here for the drama, no. If you're here for uniting and getting a single candidate and getting people ready to beat Donald Trump, yes.
I think the votes are over. I think we're far from the drama being over.
Yes.
And it's going to be an interesting next couple of weeks.
So what is that drama? Is that Bernie kind of dragging this out?
Yeah.
Sticking around for a while?
This is all up to Bernie. This can be painful, or it can be a story of coming together and being united. I'm not convinced that we're going to get the latter.
I think that's right. One thing that was sort of interesting to see last night, right, a second Super Tuesday, is that Bernie Sanders didn't come out and speak. He went home to Vermont. Right. Mm-hmm. He's come out this morning, Wednesday, the day after, and said that he's not getting out, or I guess the campaign, his supporters are saying that. But that was a really interesting choice to not speak. And you put that against the backdrop of Joe Biden last night came out to Constitution Hall, no crowd, an extremely presidential speech. Tight.
Sounding better than ever.
I
mean, that was the Joe Biden that people have been like, where is he? And he was there last night. And you're absolutely right. He sounded like a president. He sounded ready to be the one to unite everybody. And he was thanking Bernie supporters, already beginning his narrative of unity.
Strategically really smart. And Bryan, to your point, is this over? I think, we talk a lot about momentum. Obviously, we saw a lot of momentum going into Super Tuesday for Joe Biden. We now saw yesterday he benefited from those wins on Super Tuesday with some more really definitive and big victories yesterday.
Biden's benefiting, but Sanders is also backtracking. Sanders is losing states. He won in 2016. He's not growing his coalition.
His coalition at all.
His path, it's amazing where we are compared to where we were not even a month ago. But his path just seems completely evaporated.
At the time when, from this momentum, Joe Biden is seemingly getting stronger through this process, right? There was a really interesting exchange in Michigan with an auto worker who said to Joe Biden, charged Joe Biden with wanting to take away his guns. Mm-hmm. And Joe Biden went right back at him, told him he was full of you-know-what.
Right.
And, I'm from Michigan. I had a bunch of people texting me from Michigan. This is the Joe Biden that we want.
Yeah.
We want more of this Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Like push
and it's
back.
Funny, he got away from that, right? Joe Biden, before he announced for president, was talking about bringing the president out back and settling this man. I was a very fired up Joe Biden. He got into the campaign and he got on the debate stage and was kind of like, you know what I'm going to say, and had a very sort of like reserved, kind of lackluster performance over and over again. Now he's sort of, dare I say, pissed off Joe again, and it's working for him.
Well, in the first couple of debates, I remember thinking, is he nervous that he's going to say on this big stage where he has to deal with this progressive flank of the party, multiple people out trying to pull him to the left. He's the presumptive nominee in the early stages, and he seems restrained. Like he starts to say something, and then he'll say, "Oh, my time is up. Let me stop." And it's like, what in the heck is going on? How is this man not more fired up? And the performance of late makes it seem like he was restrained because he was like, I don't know what's going to happen in this field of people, and I need to make sure that I am ready. I think my voters are with me. there's no way to prove that until we actually send people to the ballot boxes. Now that's bearing fruit. And I have to say, I think it's a big reminder for people in Washington that we have all these ideas about what people, that the progressives are going to take it and that the left flank of our party is pulling us one way. Outside of this echo chamber, look what the voters are telling us.
Yeah, and look essentially the campaign started letting Joe be Joe shortly before South Carolina when it looked like he was doomed. I mean, I was on a podcast in this room a couple weeks ago talking about Sanders being our nominee, talking about Biden possibly dropping out after a poor performance again. And we are come full circle. Biden's once again our nominee, or soon to be our nominee. He's our front runner. And it seems like it's a done deal.
Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe's back.
Riding with
That's
Biden.
Right.
Riding with Biden.
So let's. I want to go back to Biden's speech because I think that's important. But just before we pivot there, you both mentioned that you don't think the drama is over. So we may or may not have a debate on Sunday night. There's some pressure from Clyburn and others for the party to cancel it, to start really aligning behind Biden. But if we keep this debate, what does Sanders do from here? I want to get into what Elizabeth Warren or some others who haven't endorsed yet could do. What is the drama over the next couple of weeks that we're going to see?
Well, I think I think it could be drama. There's a couple of decisions here, right? One is the Sanders campaign and what their path forward is, and really, I think they have to make the case for what that path is. I mean, mathematically, yes, it is still possible. Mm-hmm. So they may just hang on to that. I think they're going to, risk some very strong calls from party leaders, the establishment, quote unquote, as they say. But I think they're going to get a lot of pressure to either define a path that others don't see or get out. But then there's also, I think, the drama that is going to come from Sanders supporters.
Yes.
And they've really become increasingly toxic. Many of them have clearly taken this very personally and are engaging sort of online and in some tactics that really are not the best.
They were quite nasty on Elizabeth Warren when she dropped out, demanding sort of her endorsement immediately in a not so friendly way.
Well, I think Mayor Pete is going to be vocal in the next in the coming weeks and months. And he laid the groundwork for that, right? In the last debate where he said, why is it your people are so often the people online that are nasty? And I don't think that pressure is going to let up because now it's more important now, right? But I don't know that, Bernie Sanders has a long career in the Senate where he holds out.
Yeah, and Bernie doesn't listen to the establishment, right? That's his whole campaign. The establishment is not going to make him do anything. In fact, the establishment is screwing him over. I'm starting to get curious. When does an AOC, when do some of Bernie's bigger supporters, some of those very strong voices on the far left, if I may, start to say, okay, it's time to switch over to Biden?
Well, I think they need to decide what do they want Biden to embrace from their campaign and from their perspective, and what do they want out of it in a democratic platform.
They actually might be the game changers.
And I think the longer it goes on, though, I think they lose leverage to get that into Biden's platform.
Yes.
So, I think there's been a big strategic misstep from the Sanders campaign since Super Tuesday, though, on this. Yes, he's anti-establishment, but I think they made some big mistakes in calling out the establishment when you had black voters overwhelmingly come out for Joe Biden. Those black voters are not established. They're not part of the establishment. I don't think they would consider themselves part of the establishment.
And they would scoff at the notion that they are.
Yeah.
And they'd say, well, then where are we getting special treatment?
Right.
Yeah, it was a good talking point. It was a bad strategy, right? Bernie needed to expand his base of supporters from 2016. And in fact, it seems like he hung on there at the high 20s, 30% for a while. But all he did was really fire up that small group more and more and never really brought in more people to his fold.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a ceiling, right? His ceiling is probably in the low 30s, and it's not nothing, but it's not going to be enough. And I think they need to pivot to what they want to put into Biden's platform and start to unite.
What do you all think of Elizabeth Warren? She's withheld her endorsement. Is she comes out this week? Is she the nail in the coffin of the Sanders campaign, or?
You know, I listened to her communications director's interview on The Daily a day or so ago, and it was a really good interview. It was really interesting because it was thoughtful and reserved. And I imagine that this woman's name is Chris Northman. I imagine that she and Senator Warren are talking every day and figuring out what's next. I tend to think that Elizabeth Warren will choose the candidate that gives us the best chance at beating Trump, and that is Biden. When that comes, I don't know.
Well, and I think another interesting thing to look at here is, like, what does Bernie Sanders really have to lose in this? I mean, I think he's the leader of the self-proclaimed leader of this movement. He's got a bunch of followers. Elizabeth Warren, I think, still has a big future in the Democratic Party, whether that is a voice in the Senate.
And Elizabeth Warren likes to get things done. Elizabeth Warren might represent a progressive a slice of progressives in the Democratic Party, but she also goes to work every day in the Senate and finds Republicans to work with, finds moderate Democrats to do things. I mean, she takes that job very seriously, and it's incremental progress on hard issues that drives her.
It seems much more likely that we might see a role for Elizabeth Warren in a Biden administration than we would a Bernie Sanders.
Totally.
And not to mention a role for herself, but a say over others.
Yes.
Elizabeth Warren has made a name for herself. It doesn't always make the headlines, but of being very particular over who is appointed to certain Treasury positions, both under Obama and Trump, holding them up in the Senate. I think this would be a time for her to get some concessions from Biden on that front in terms of an endorsement. But I imagine she needs to capitalize on that sooner rather than later.
And you have to imagine those conversations are happening. Right.
Have to. And Biden has an opportunity to gain some support from her people there. I mean, if you had Elizabeth Warren coming out and saying, I had a fantastic conversation with Joe Biden, he and I are of the same mind when it comes to empowering people to have a voice in our economy, empowering people to have a voice at the ballot box. I mean, there's so many ways that she can come out of that and say,
or we're not, and we've agreed to keep talking and keep working together.
Right.
I mean,
and
that's
I hate
the power
when we stereotype certain people's voters, but I've always felt that Elizabeth Warren's supporters might actually be closer to Biden than they are to Bernie. Mm-hmm. I think they see Bernie as an unrealistic leader. I think they saw Warren as a realistic progressive alternative, and I think Biden needs to be, in their minds, pushed into some more progressive policies, but they see him as a realistic chance of beating Trump, and they'd rather push him than lose again to Trump in November.
Yeah, so I think looking at Elizabeth Warren and what her influence is going to be on a Biden candidacy and administration is probably more worthwhile than thinking exactly how Bernie's going to impact this.
Let me ask one question before we take a break. I want to go back. Biden's speech last night, a very presidential setting, a pretty tight speech by Biden in terms of, well rehearsed, not off script. He was probably reading off a teleprompter, but it felt like an address to the nation. And it strikes me that at this moment where, frankly, we're all a little panicked about coronavirus, we're seeing turmoil in the markets. More so than even a month ago, Americans are looking for very stable leadership.
Absolutely.
And to me, that answer is Biden, not Sanders. How much of that do you think is going to play out over the next few weeks?
So I want to read you Dan Rather's quote from last night. He said, Joe Biden's speech tonight was inclusive, soft-spoken, empathetic, and positive. It was about decency, dignity, and honor. It suited him well and may bode for a heck of a showdown in style and substance in November.
Absolutely.
I mean, can you get more?
Yeah, this is a real opportunity, I think, for the Biden campaign. Right? They went into Super Tuesday with a message that Joe Biden is the candidate of results. And I think they've got a real opportunity here to make a nice segue to Joe Biden is compassionate and competent, and he gets things done.
Mm-hmm.
Right, in a time of crisis. In many ways, watching that, it was bad news for Bernie Sanders. It also was bad news for Donald Trump. I think a lot of Americans saw our president last night ready to take a leadership role, which, regardless of your politics, I think it's been a little chaotic over there at the White House the past few weeks.
And remember, that speech was conceived of deciding they were not going to have a crowd due to the corona concerns.
Right.
So, it would be interesting to see if what strategies if they might have done that anyway, but that really they got a huge advantage out of it, the Biden campaign. And I think, when we talk about just going back to the sort of drama and what we're going to see, I think we're going to see Joe Biden start to really make this a two-person race against
against Trump, not against Sanders.
Self-looking presidential against Trump, and start to sort of not ignore the Sanders supporters, but you can start to move to sort of ignore Bernie Sanders and remind people why you're the best candidate to take on Donald Trump.
Well, and I think Joe Biden, we're seeing that he's feeling like he can be himself again. And we've had all these conversations about, well, Joe on stage, can he really take on Trump? And the answer is, Joe Biden is not Donald Trump, so he can't try to be that. But if he is pragmatic, steady, the guy you trust, the one you want in charge when things are crazy, and then that contrasted with Donald Trump, I mean, that's very powerful, I think.
I think that's a good segue into the general election. So let's take a quick break. I want to come back, talk about what the general election will look like, and also talk a little bit about what Congress is doing now around the coronavirus. You're listening to HPS Insights.
You're listening to HPS Insights, a regular podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies. Be sure to subscribe to hear the latest from the HPS team on policy debates affecting the business and political communities.
We're back on HPS Insights, talking about the Democratic primary, and we're going to shift gears now and start talking about the general election. So I think Joe Biden woke up this morning and started thinking about uniting this party in a pivot to the general election. I'm curious, what do you all see that general election campaign looking like? What are they focused on? Where are they going to channel their resources? What states are we interested in?
Pennsylvania. Probably Michigan now.
Yeah, I think...
Big win in Michigan last night, for sure, yeah.
I think, the turnout numbers have shown us, and if you look at really the just huge percentages of parts of the Democratic base, black voters, women, I think what that showed us is there could be a reshuffling of the deck of states that are in play for the general election. And while you might... I don't think we're going to see anything come off the board this early, but we might see less resources being needed in a state like Michigan, which Republicans won in 2016,
right,
and putting places like Georgia
or Florida
more in play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't do the math right now, but do you see a scenario where Trump still has Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, but Dems are picking up Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida?
Honestly, a week ago, if we were having this conversation after the first Super Tuesday, I might have said that's still what the map looks like. I think this coronavirus and just the world changing, what's happening in the global economy, I think we cannot discount that everything is sort of still on the table, and we're going to have to, I think all of those states are going to be in play right up through the fall.
So if I'm the Biden campaign, you don't want to politically take advantage, but the coronavirus is a huge opportunity. Trump has spent his whole presidency focused on, I'm in charge, the way I do things, it always works out. Trade wars, it worked out. Battle with China, it worked out. Wall worked out. Coronavirus really seems to be a chink in his armor.
And remember,
it's getting worse and worse. He can't figure it out. And here's steady Joe Biden coming in as the experienced sort of policymaker.
And who's starting to tune in? Suburban moms.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's, regardless of like swing voters, they don't want erratic, right? And they may be driven by the economy and their bank account, but I think you have things like a global pandemic going on, and that really starts to bring sort of more
Yeah,
questions.
and it's a different issue, right? Everything I read, Trump is worried about the market and the market moving. That is not the suburban mom or myself, the suburban dad issue. It's, is there enough tests? Because someone in my neighborhood now got it. Is my kid's school going to be closed for the rest of the year? Like, this starts to be like, I don't think the government has their hands around this, and I'm sort of gambling every time I go out in public of like, maybe I'm the next one that catches coronavirus.
And Trump always seems to gamble on, like, just like you say, he did the tariffs trade. He does something wild, and then he's just like, I'm going to keep on telling people what I believe, and then the situation will correct, and I'll take credit. And what's, I don't mean to make light of it, but the timing on coronavirus is very bad for him because it's going to be a long time. We're going to see, we're going to see more and more cases in the U.S. and it's going to keep going, and there's nothing that he can really do about it. I just think back to Obama and the Ebola response. We had a czar so quickly. There was very much, and I believe it was a genuine effort, but there was a public effort of, we are on this and we are doing everything we can. We are making sure that hospitals are equipped, that medical workers have what they need to keep themselves safe, to keep patients safe, to keep the public safe. Joe Biden, should say that he would be handling it that way too. And by the way, he's also going to be doing everything he can in his power.
And what we saw from Trump in the last 72 hours was a Sunday spent playing golf with Washington Nationals in Florida. He made a visit to the Hill yesterday to visit Republican senators who, like, there's no unity, there's no, right, they're not, Republican senators are not going to control what Congress does.
Right.
So there's no outreach, and I think every step this White House has taken and is making on Corona is laying out a narrative, and it's going to be incumbent on Democrats to knit that together for people to tell that story.
And it's not just a narrative that they tried something and failed. It's that they're not taking it seriously.
They had no plan.
There's no address to the nation. There's no appointment. I mean, Pence to some degree.
And Fauci.
Right.
But I mean, but they're still out there saying, Pence is telling people to go to CVS Minute clinics to get tested, and he's also saying that there are enough tests. You can't get tested at CVS Minute Clinic, and there aren't enough tests.
And Crisis 101, you can't work backwards.
No.
You can't work backwards and take advantage of what you have. I'm not shocked to see Trump tweeting that this is a hoax, that Democrats are building this up, but I am wondering like what power he would have if he put a couple messages out on Twitter of like, Americans, be safe, wash your hands.
Yeah, a little A/B testing for the president.
Meanwhile,
I mean, that would just show all his followers how much he is taking this seriously and probably put to rest some of this.
Meanwhile, what he's tweeting is endorsing his former attorney general's opponent in the Senate race. I mean, it's just...
This is wild and might need another podcast episode. If Democrats can't win this, I hope Jeff Sessions wins and comes back and haunts Donald Trump's dreams for a few years.
At least we'll have more content for Saturday Night Live if that happens.
But there's there's sort of another political showdown. We're talking about electoral politics here. There's another political showdown that I think is going to play out here in how Congress responds, working with the White House on Corona.
Right.
And
Trump wants a plan, right? Can we start there? Trump wants some kind of response, economic relief, otherwise, or does he not care? I mean, it seems like he wants something to send a signal to the markets.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, look, this is a guy who's, instituted rate cuts, encouraged rate cuts, would like to see that drive right through November. I mean, yesterday I think they were floating that they'd like a payroll tax through November. I mean, he is electorally motivated in this, but also I would think everybody at the White House agrees there is economic stimulus or economic recovery that they are incentivized to work with Congress to deliver.
So, Stacy, I want to hear more from you on this. I woke up this morning, every paper, once again, Nancy Pelosi, most powerful person in Washington. She's going to control this package, working with Secretary Mnuchin. What does she try to do? I assume she can't obviously take advantage of it politically, but she's always been good at, getting in what the party wants and what it feels like people actually need. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, remember, I think Nancy Pelosi is driven by two things. She's driven by what she thinks is fundamentally the right way to govern the country for people, and she is driven by her Democratic caucus and those members and making sure that they have what they need to go home into their districts and talk about what they're doing to support people. And in this
districts, by the way, not to interrupt you, but are cities and suburbs with those suburban moms that you talked about are so critical to our reelection.
Yes, absolutely. So, I think she's expected to present a package today to her caucus, today here on Wednesday to her caucus. I think the White House original plan was dead on arrival in Congress. And I think, Nancy Pelosi, because she is a master legislator, she knows in moments like this how to take the principles of the Democratic Party and what they believe can economically help people and get those into packages. I'll give you an example. So the stimulus bill in 2009. The stimulus bill in 2009 had a bunch of money for renewable energy. Not the first thing that people would be thinking of, right? And the most money Congress has ever given to carbon emissions came in a fiscal stimulus. So Nancy Pelosi has this really drive in moments like this to unite her caucus to sometimes swallow a hard bill, right? This is not easy votes for members to take, both on the progressive side of her caucus.
Depends what's in it, though, right? What do you think she puts in this?
It does.
I've heard paid leave. I've heard school lunch support.
She needs to be very. I think she needs to be very careful. Well, I think she will be, because you say she is a master legislator.
Look, I think a hardcore principle of Democrats in Congress is unemployment insurance. We know from our time with you guys working in the House and the Senate.
And our service sector, tourism sectors are going to be hit.
And we haven't heard a lot about unemployment insurance in the regular order of Washington like we used to back in 2005, 2006 when we were working up there. But I think you're going to see a big push for Democrats on that. I think there seems to be bipartisan agreement on paid sick leave. I mean, I think that's a place where Democrats and Republicans...
Yeah, they seem to be arguing over the period of time versus the...
Yeah, and then you're going to see things that Democrats have always cared about. You mentioned the school lunch program. What are you doing for hourly workers? I think you're going to see a strong push, and I think you're going to see Nancy Pelosi use her leverage and Democrats' leverage to ensure that those are the measures that are in a bill, which will both, they believe, help the economy and will give her members a bill that they can actually support.
What's more important for Pelosi? Is it a bill members can support and be proud of, or is it a bill that McConnell will pass and Trump will sign into law?
I think it would be a bill that her members will support, but I think it would be wrong to think that Nancy Pelosi thinks of this politically first, as sort of skillful a political tactician she is.
I mean, I think she will want to have those things, but I think that she will be. I think she needs a bill that McConnell will bring to the floor and that Trump will sign, but with the things that indicate to her people, I'm with you, and I am a standard bearer of this party.
So I think she'll.
And don't get me wrong, McConnell
both.
has as much pressure to pass something.
Totally.
She does.
She needs to make it has to be something that he feels forced to move.
Right.
He being McConnell.
I mean, we were there in 2008. We saw what happened when the first TARP bill failed. The market reaction. I can't imagine. Meghan was there too. Sorry. I can't imagine what happens if McConnell defeats a bill and what that market looks like.
And look, like what last fall, USMCA. I mean, Nancy Pelosi got things into USMCA, and she was able to go to her caucus and make the case that this bill was strengthened through this process, and that we got things that are important to us as Democrats in this bill. So I think she'll be able to do both.
Great. Let's pause there for another break, and we'll come back, and I want to wrap up a little bit on some more Joe Biden, some more look back on the Democratic primary. You're listening to HPS Insights.
Every Friday, Hamilton Place Strategies founding partner Tony Fratto joins John Fagan and Brendan Walsh of Markets Policy Partners for the HPS Macrocast, an in-depth look at the macroeconomic news driving the week. Check out the latest episode at hamiltonplacestrategies.com/podcast.
We're back on HPS Insights talking about the Democratic primary, and with what I think we all conclude is basically the primary wrapping up, I want to spend a minute before we end the episode talking about what we've seen over the last year. We've come a little bit full circle. Biden was the front runner about a year ago, had some up and downs, but he's back at the front runner. But a lot of candidates, a lot of twists and turns along the way. It felt like a very stressful year for some of us. What did you all take away from the past 12 months?
I think one of my big takeaways is we now have evidence of the enthusiasm and concern within the country to beat Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And I don't just say that as a Democrat who personally wants to beat Donald Trump, but I think we're seeing record turnout, doubling the turnout in Virginia, turnout up 40% in Michigan over 4 years ago. So I think maybe some things that we might have underestimated
or attributed to just DC political chatter
months ago.
Yeah, playing out in the country.
Yeah, and then I think the other piece, that this year has showed us is that there still is a very strong marble ceiling for female candidates. And it doesn't mean that every female candidate is hampered by being a female candidate. I think there was also some bright spots, but there is still a very strong marble ceiling in that we're standing at the end of this with two 70-something-year-old white men.
I think the lesson is we have to let our candidates have to be themselves. Hillary Clinton struggled because she was bending over backwards to contort herself into something that could suit all members of the party.
I think that's right.
And it didn't work. And Joe Biden, I think, has struggled until now trying to do some of that same contortion. And I hope that he's going to hit his stride and be Uncle Joe. Because that's where he succeeds. That's where he's authentic. And I think the voters in the Democratic Party are rewarding him for that and saying, yes, that is what we want and that's what we need.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of what they know, right? And it did strike me that after all of this, we ended up with the two known white guys in their 70s, where, I think the women, there are a lot of issues there, I think, for sure, in terms of some of the sexist coverage and other issues. But, even some of the younger candidates, I think they all had their moments, but might be a bit ways off before they really capture the whole party's attention.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, there was no candidate in this race who had the experience in the Senate and 8 years as vice president to sort of match this moment in history. So we can't attribute all of it to sexism.
Right, of course.
As you say, some of it was there, but let's not discount that there was a real resounding call from voters over the last 2 weeks that they want stability, they want a known commodity. I mean, you could say that voters sort of ran up, threw their arms around Joe Biden and said very enthusiastically in huge numbers, please save us.
Yeah, I attribute a lot of that to Trump in the sense that we spent all summer and fall, like, who is the right one? I think there was so much interest in this race and different candidates because we're so worried about getting this right. And then I think at the end of the day, everyone came home to Joe of what they've known and what they've trusted in this moment of crisis.
And I think it's voters who, up until now, were interested in hearing what the other folks had to say. They're like, well, I'll listen to Elizabeth Warren, I'll listen to the other folks. But then when it was time to go and pull the lever, they thought, I got to go with the guy that I feel the most comfortable with and I think can do it.
I mean, Rome is burning and they don't want a revolution.
Right. And there's concern about two 70-year-old white men, and there'll be a lot of jokes, but I will just end this part by saying I'm encouraged about the future of the Democratic Party. I think seeing the emergence of a Pete Buttigieg, seeing Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, I mean, they're not going away. Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, who I expected
Joe Biden himself said it the other day, right, on the campaign, I think just over the weekend or early this week, he said, I'm the bridge. He sort of acknowledged this generational shift, that this is probably the last of this generation who will be in power. And I think that's a responsibility, and how that plays out. How do you bring some of those, how do you pass that torch? How do you bring some of those younger voters into the fold, both in your cabinet and as a vice president?
Well, and then I know we have to move away from this, but the party failed when Barack Obama became the nominee, and then we crowned Hillary Clinton the heir apparent. I understand why, but we failed in building a bench. There has to be a strong bench, and the party has to do that. Party has to be looking for leaders in state houses across the country to encourage, to train up. There need to be more Joe Kennedys. We just have to have. This was an important exercise, even if painful sometimes in the beginning of the primary season. But just like you say, all those people have to be examples to the ones that will come after them.
But to the point on the heir apparent, I mean, there's a huge opportunity here for Joe Biden and for the country to select a vice president who will de facto become an heir apparent.
So let's end there. Let's do what Washington does best and wildly speculate way too early. Who do you see as Biden's choice as VP if he ends up the nominee?
Well, I personally think he has to choose a woman. Not just because of all of the qualified candidates that were running this time, but because I think voters have shown that. I mean, I think women are going to be critical in the fall, in the general election. I think the issues that are right square, and there will be a strong comparison between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, are the issues that are top of mind for women. And I think he would be advantaged by selecting a woman.
Do you have a name? Do you have a choice?
Well, I thought there was a really interesting sort of moment in Detroit the other night where Joe Biden was standing on the stage with Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. And I thought any one of those three would be a great choice for him. I think, obviously you can't have this conversation without talking about Stacey Abrams, and talk about a leader of a movement, and her home state of Georgia. I think that makes her an interesting candidate. And I think we're going to see some names floated onto the list who maybe are not politicians or folks that have already ran for president, that will get sort of bantered around as well.
Great. Meghan?
So as you guys know, I've changed my opinion from a couple of weeks ago. I think Senator Harris.
What does she bring to the ticket?
She brings enthusiasm. She has a track record in California. I think a lot of people listen to her and feel heard. And she has some charisma and energy. So,
one thing I think is interesting to watch is Cory Booker, though. Mm-hmm. Cory Booker, in some ways, Cory Booker was a little ahead of his time, but Cory Booker could be a really interesting person who sort of bridges this gap, right, to sort of the shifting. And Cory Booker on the campaign trail and in his time as mayor, in the Senate, I mean, he talked about changing the system. He's not a status quo player. And I think he's got some really thoughtful ideas about how to do that. And he's going to definitely be somebody to watch.
I think he'd be a fantastic VP. I think you have to watch him. I do think it probably is a woman for some electoral reasons, but I keep an eye on Booker. I think Biden will look to pull maybe from the Midwest, where he's been doing well in the primaries, but will need to do well against Trump. So I look at folks, my kind of wild card is Tammy Duckworth.
Yeah.
I think she would be a great addition to that ticket, and a tough challenge for Trump to try to message around her service, her experience as the first female
my God. I mean,
to
what
give
a
birth
woman.
while being a United States senator.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a historic figure in many ways.
Yeah, and has been a strong voice for democratic values in the Senate.
Well, and you point out something that I was thinking about when we were talking about Booker and Harris. They were not easy on Joe Biden on the debate stage.
They were not.
And to the point that, I mean, like, I think that if Joe Biden would pick either one of them, he is demonstrating that was campaigning, and now we need to go govern. He and Tammy Duckworth don't have that.
I do think Biden will look for a partner. I think that'll be interesting. I think he does want to be a bridge. I think he looks back on his time as VP and I think rightly so, but in his mind saw himself as very much a partner to Barack Obama, and I think he'll look for that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we still see a Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, some others that he's familiar with, both from the campaign or the Senate, end up on his short list.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's leave it there. We certainly have a lot more to talk about that we can spend time on, but we'll wrap it there, and we'll come back maybe in a few weeks and see how our predictions
and actually have a nominee.
We might actually have a nominee and a VP pick. So thank you both, Stacy Kerr, Meghan Pennington, for joining me today. I'm Bryan DeAngelis. As always, thanks for listening to HPS Insights.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insight and visit us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.